This panel is also actually not only highly relevant to the moment that we're in, but for anyone who knows about Monterey and the history of Monterey, there is a long and storied presence of our national security apparatus here. I would say anchored by the Naval Postgraduate School and the Defense Language Institute, the Presidio of Monterey being one of the oldest installations here in California, federal installations. But there's many others, and so these technologies, as we've been talking about over the last couple of days, have many uses, and what we're talking about here today is dual use innovation, bridging defense and commercial markets as a way to both meet our national security and homeland security needs and also help our innovative companies and startups scale and come to market. So as the pace of technological change accelerates, the lines between defense and commercial applications are blurring, and we support that. This panel explores how innovations in AI, robotics, aerospace, and cybersecurity are being applied across both sectors and what it takes to navigate that path. So the panelists can come up on stage, and I'll, as I did yesterday, do a brief intro of our moderator, Ingar Grev, who and will then introduce the rest of the panelists. So Ingar is the Director of Defense Business Development at Motion and Flow Control Products. That is not a plumbing company, but it's the largest U.S. distributor for Parker Hannifin, and Ingar can tell us what that is. He is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. Ingar began his defense career as a nuclear submarine officer before supporting the Missile Defense Agency as a systems engineer and R&D leader with Raytheon. It was in that R&D role that he began developing dual-use innovations, eventually launching a consulting business that helped commercial clients adapt their technologies for defense applications. He later brought that expertise to 3M and now continues this work at MFCP. Ingar.
Right. Thanks, Josh. Yeah, what's the clicker for? To turn you off?
You don't need it.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is going to be a great panel, and we had a great chance to chat over the last several days, and this is going to be really fascinating. We'd like you also to, as we're going along here, just anything we come up that stimulates you, go ahead and ask some questions. But I think we're going to have a really great conversation here you're going to appreciate. And again, but if there's something you're trying to pull out of this, it's not a complex topic, but it's a diverse topic. There's a lot of different ways to skin this cat. So we'd just like you to think about that as we're going along here. So I'll introduce my panelists here. Kirsten. Took a long time to practice that with Emma Ingar. I really had to get these names down. So Dr. Kirsten Schabel, she completed her PhD in electrical engineering from Stanford and is currently the Director of Systems Engineering at Anello Photonics. At Anello, she is leading efforts to build an innovative optical gyroscope technology that enables navigation for autonomous systems in GPS-denied environments. Dr. Schabel has been deeply involved with dual-use engagements and has seen firsthand how to successfully transfer commercial technologies to DoD markets. Dr. Alan Van Nevel is the Associate Provost for Research at the Naval Postgraduate School here in Monterey. He is a career Navy scientist, having been a postdoctoral fellow, researcher, principal investigator, team lead, and science and technology leader for the Naval Air Warfare Center Weapons Division and the Navy before joining NPS in February 2023. General Andy Croft. General Croft retired in 2023 from 34 years in the Air Force. Well, I like to say Air Farce. Just going to make sure I have that right. Hey, it's a spelling error. It's supposed to be farce. It's a long story. I'll talk to you about that later. His last posting was at United States Southern Command in Miami, Florida, where he served as a deputy commander. He is a career fighter pilot with over 3,000 hours of flight time in various fighters and the MQ-1 Predator. He served in multiple joint assignments, including the Joint Staff, NATO, NORAD, NORTHCOM, and in Iraq in the fight against ISIS in 2017. He is a passionate air power and innovation advocate and looks forward to speaking with you. Let's see, next to him we have Tony. Tony Williams is a retired Army engineering officer, and I won't get into the Army, and Senior Executive Director with Army Futures Command. He is currently a full-time senior advisor with the Naval Postgraduate School, Office of Research and Innovation here in Monterey. So good, you stepped it up a little notch with the Navy, appreciate that. Where he helps lead the Naval X Central Coast Tech Bridge to scout, fund, and support the DoD X technology firms in Silicon Valley and beyond. And down at the end there's David Dunning. David is the Director of Global Innovation and Policy at General Aviation Management Association. Did I say the last part right? Is it association?
We're halfway.
Gamma.
Halfway there.
Where he, because I just had the acronym here. So Gamma, where he leads initiatives to advance electric propulsion and to advanced air mobility, AAM. He oversees Gamma's Electric Propulsion and Innovation Committee, EPIC, and works closely with regulators and industry on the development and certification of emerging aircraft technologies. David's background spans military, civil, and government aviation. He is a certified private pilot and holds FAA, A&P, and IA credentials. So welcome, help me welcome our panel. So the topic really here about dual use is something, as when Josh introduced me, is something near and dear to my heart. It's how I make my living. You know, I'm a business developer, and I'm always trying to find ways to take commercial products and get them, as I always call it, inserted into the architecture. Whether that's on the manufacturer side to get spec'd in, or in my case now at MFCP, helping Parker Hannifin get it spec'd in, or helping us unseat incumbents. But ultimately, in terms of getting it specified into the architecture, I have to find something that is being sold right now in the commercial marketplace, and then go talk to the DoD and say, hey, you know, you can do this, and it's going to streamline your design. It's going to solve this requirement that you have, or maybe you didn't know you had this requirement, and now this can solve that, and gee whiz, now here's a way we can get there. And so then we have to figure out how we actually take that commercial product, working with a company that may not know how to work with the government, and get them on a vector to getting that technology implemented. So I'm going to stop talking and make this more about our panelists who have great experiences here. So we're going to start with you, Kirsten, right? And and the rest of the panelists, as we discussed earlier, just riff on this as we go along here. So Kirsten, why dual use? If a company is having success in commercial markets, what are the upsides and downsides in pursuing dual use?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, thank you everyone for having me here, and thanks for the introduction. So at Anello, we're building, you know, the first big revolution in optical gyroscope technology for decades. We're using silicon photonics to shrink down a fiber optic gyro onto a chip, and so that opens up huge new application spaces that weren't previously possible. One of the big use cases for that is all autonomous systems, land vehicles, drones, eVTOLs, and even autonomous boats. So as you can imagine, a big market space for these autonomous systems is in the defense space. So while we started off having pretty good success in the commercial space, you know, one of the first areas that we actually had a lot of success was in agriculture. That's been kind of a topic of this panel yesterday. But you know, there's a lot of autonomous systems in the commercial space, and we've had a lot of quick success there. But as you can imagine, you know, these autonomous systems in the defense space are extremely important, and even more so, you know, as the years go on, and we've seen in recent wars lately. So we really identified that and identified the need specifically for high precision navigation for these autonomous systems and enabling GPS-denied navigation for cases in war zones where there's jamming and spoofing of GPS. So you need this high precision sensor, the fiber optic gyro, and now we're enabling that sensor to be used on a wide range of different autonomous systems that weren't previously possible because of the low size, weight, and power of our innovation. So, you know, for business reasons, there's obviously a huge upside to kind of capturing that new market. But then from a motivation perspective, we really identified that you know, we can make a real difference and help the survivability of our warfighters and keep the United States at the forefront of technology. So that was really important, and we kind of find that, you know, makes us jump out of bed every day in the morning and excited to go to work and make a difference.
Thanks. Anyone else want to riff on that?
Well, I'd say for Dr. Schaub, her firm, for us in this innovation ecosystem is kind of what we love to see and shepherd through, whether it's DIU, Naval X, Army Futures Command, or even AFWorks. This is what we like to see. So she's actually done some of the things we're going to talk about in a minute, which is develop them through the SBIR and SITR process. And so just a perfect example of, a TRL 3 or 4 that gets involved with us and turns out to be a TRL 7, 8 that we introduce in the VC community, and they grow from there.
So Tony, if you can, you just threw out a whole bunch of acronyms. Well, but I am not taking your route though. So
I try so hard.
But why don't you talk a little bit though about things like Naval X, DIU, and what a SBIR is, just to have some context here for the audience.
Fair. Retired recently from the Army, and that's the first thing they tell us, right, is you need to stop talking in acronyms. So I was trying so hard. But SBIR, Small Business Innovative Research, and SITR, same thing for university partnerships. So, and this is the world that DoD folks work in when they have partnerships with companies like Anello. So that's what that one is, and our mothership, I would say, is DIU up in Mountain View, which is Defense Innovation Unit. Used to had a few other names when they started, but they probably are the most funded defense innovation shops that we have throughout the DoD. And we'll talk about that a little more.
Okay, anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, so from the Air Force perspective, and to build on that, part of the problem we've had in the DoD for years is we have a very large programming, budgeting, and execution process, which is built for multi-billion-dollar programs. The question is, how do I find a small business with a great technology or a great product that maybe we don't even have a requirement for, but we know we need? And so what this small business innovation and research funding does is it allows us to take small dollars and give them to a company that's trying to develop that product, and that's a phase 1. And then you go to a phase 2, which is more money, so you get it to a more mature stage, and then to a phase 3, which is real money, where you start developing that product. And the key, in my opinion, to try and get through this process is finding an advocate in the Department of Defense that understands the product or the technology and understands the value of it. It's sort of like you've invented the crossbow and everybody else is shooting at bows and arrows. You got to get that crossbow idea to the right people that will help you fund that crossbow, and suddenly you've developed a completely new product that changes the landscape of the DoD. An example of that is the airplane I flew, which is the MQ-1 Predator. It's the drone. We call it the drone. So it was built by General Atomics in the 90s, and guess who the first customer was? It wasn't the DoD. It wasn't even the military. It was the CIA. And the Air Force sees this thing. I'm like, wow, we could use a lot of those things. And fast forward 25 years, and we're flying thousands of them. But we didn't even have a requirement for it. So you gotta actually establish an advocate, and then that requirement may come as they realize the value of the product. Thanks.
Anyone else? David, why pursue dual use, or Alan?
I think anytime you can, defense, civil aviation, and academia can collaborate, end product there is you accelerate the certification process on the civil side. And then to bring it back to the community here, that'll give you a little more confidence, and you will be more informed in the decision making that you need to get through as you look at integration into your communities.
Al?
Well, one aspect of dual use, heard from everybody on the panel, is about spin-in, taking innovative ideas from small business and getting them into the DoD. But dual use also, for the longest time, because I've been a Navy scientist for almost 30 years, is about spin out. Because the Navy, the DoD invests a lot in research, both external to small companies, primes, but also within their Navy labs. And so for small business, it's another resource to consider, that there's technology that has been patented, there's IP that small companies can access to advance their technology development for their own programs. So, for example, when I was at China Lake, we licensed high-temperature materials that were basically green materials, easily made from renewable materials, but it had extreme high temperature performance. And so, but other companies would license that to use in their own product. So they could leverage the internal investment of the Navy or the DoD to further their own business interests. And generally the licensing terms are really, really good.
So let me ask just the panel in general here, and that's a great question, right? It's one of the ones you offered earlier about the ITAR compliance. What are some of the hurdles? So from my perspective, dual use is a fantastic idea. Not necessarily for every business, but it's a way to diversify your business lines, right? So if everything you're doing is commercial, the advantage of the government is sometimes you might get in a project, an acquisition program that's going to be funded for the next 20 or 30 years. And if you are the company that's spec'd in on that, right, you've got business for the next 20 or 30 years. Has some costs associated with it, so forth, that you have to keep in mind, but it's a very attractive business area. And when I was at 3M, we would take a look at the fact that the federal government was in aggregate, our largest customer. And so, and then about 10 years ago, they realized, boy, it's so big, we should figure out a way to be more proactive in terms of engaging with that. And that's where they hired me and some other folks to come in and start creating a more aggressive approach to getting after government business. So that we didn't lose that opportunity, because your best customers are your competitors' best prospects, right? And so you don't, if you just don't manage that business line, you can lose it. And so there's a whole bunch of reasons why I want to get after it. So, well, what are some of the challenges we may see in dual use, right? So, because we were talking about this in the room, we're going to kind of go down the line, and I'll start with you, Alan, if it's all right. Just what are some of the things that some folks here in the room will say, well, it sounds like it's too hard, right? There are some challenges. So let's talk about some of the challenges, some of the opportunities with doing dual use. Alan?
So the second question that came from the audience, kind of addresses that. The part of the challenge is just the diversity of avenues that people can try to take to engage with the DoD. So it really is, hey, what is that first step? And that's why the Navy has done things like Naval X, and this might be a good segue to Tony, in that Naval X is intended to be, in some ways, a pathfinder to say, oh, that's really interesting technology. How do we connect it to the people that, as General Croft said, how do I get that guy with the crossbow to the people that go, you're right, I really need that. And another way to think of it is, I always joke about it. NPS hosts an exercise called GIFIX, and I always call it, hey, we're looking for that peanut butter and chocolate moment of, I didn't know you could do that. Oh, I didn't know you had that capability. How do we get those connections made? But DoD is just so big that finding those right connections is critical, and it's hard. But once you find it, then you'll accelerate that capability growth.
Andy?
So from my perspective, it's all about the connections you make in environments like this. So the DoD, in my analogy, is sort of like the Windsor Castle. You're trying to charge the gate. You got to find somebody that's in the castle that knows where the opening is, and the example is Defense Innovation Unit in Mountain View. That's one. Those that are involved in small business innovation units, and that's where you talk to folks in this room or up in the panels like this that understand the value of what you're proposing, and then can connect you with these entities that have, in many cases, sort of they have like a business, an open day, like an industry day, where you can actually go present to the people that work there. And DIU, I think, has 7 innovation units. You have like energy, autonomy, and those different things. And often these products will fit into one or multiple bins where you can actually engage and then start to pursue that small business initiative that has funding associated with it. But again, it's making those connections and sort of selling your product and your technology so that people that are sort of pedestrians like me that understand the value of it, even though we haven't set a requirement. I understand the military value of the product.
Yeah, if I can add to that. So I guess kind of this new Defense Innovation Acquisition Program was really, I worked for a guy who's kind of his ideas early. Let's make the DoD buy stuff more like Silicon Valley. So that was Dr. Carter, Ash Carter, former Secretary of Defense. And we got a little busy when he first had that when I was working for him at ATL. And then we came back to it when he was a SecDef and really have tried to disrupt the way the DoD does acquisition. And so this whole innovation unit approach allows us, like General Croft said, to get at what is dual use. And you may have a concept, even at a TRL 1, 2, or 3, that we think the DoD could use, and we want to come see you and show you that and ask you if you're interested. So sadly, though, like the DoD for years, a little bit stovepiped. Each of us have our own little innovation unit. So they bring in guys like us who are retired or have worked in both sides of the commercial sector, maybe with a VC, and then come back into DoD so that we can help companies not get frustrated. Because I know when I talk to anyone and I say, yeah, why don't you look at some of the SBIR programs at DoD and getting involved with some of those grants? I really think your product or service might be of interest. And they're like, it's so tough to, get through the labyrinth of DoD acquisition and that kind of thing. And we always say, hey, used to be. However, with these innovation units, usually in your local community, NavalX has 18 different tech bridge directors or hubs across the country that have these little sessions like Joe Croft is talking about. So you can come in on a small business day and understand maybe what the Navy needs at one of the Navy's weapons centers or at where I'm at MPS here. So stay at it is what I always tell them, and let us help you kind of figure out your way through there, because there is opportunity right now for sure.
So one of the questions that came up over here, well, actually, before we get into that, TRL 1, 2, 3, does anyone here not know what we say when we say TRLs? Okay. All right. So can you, someone want to give a quick primer on TRLs? Andy, you're the one who said.
It's technology readiness level. So 1 is low, 8 or 9 is high. And so you go to a min viable product, and there's certain levels there.
Well, to expand on it, TRLs were invented by NASA many, many years ago. TRL 1 and 2 are typically considered basic and applied research, which is, again, where I live. But then, small companies or Navy labs, Air Force labs might be operating in that 3, 4, 5 space going, hey, they're a proof of concept. Is this relevant to the Navy or the military? And then moving into 6, 7, 8, 9, minimal viable products, things. 9 is production quality. I think 9 for NASA was, hey, we'll actually put it on a spaceship and send it up.
Right.
And I'll just jump in here. I think one of our biggest challenges is we see opportunity in TR level 1 and 2. Like, that's a great idea, a great concept, but everybody in the DoD wants TR level 8 or 9. Yep. And to bridge the gap from, say, 3 to 7 is the huge challenge, because if you're a small business with a new technology, that's where all the money is, that's where your investment is with no return, and you're trying to bridge that sort of valley of get my product or my concept to a viable product that can be purchased or actually implemented. And to be honest, SBIR 1 and 2 sort of get you a little farther. What you really need is SBIR 3, where you actually get some real money and some real investment back into your opportunity. And often maybe the commercial market won't support you there because it's just not anywhere near a min viable product. And that's what the DoD is trying to do, to try and bridge that. I'd say with some success, not as much me personally as I'd like, because you need to take risk. And maybe you invest in 20 of these things and one pans out. The military is risk averse, and that's part of the challenge. That's why you need to find an advocate, a senior leader that goes, I get it. I want to pull you along, and we're going to take risk, and we're going to lose a bunch of times, but eventually we're going to get to a win.
Right. So, sometimes there's this, those of you who haven't ever engaged with the DoD before, there may be a perception that, well, there's a process you have to go through, and you have to look for an RFP that's going to go out on sam.gov, or there's some other way you have to go to a conference. And so more often than not, it really is about who you know and your access, and that's, a lot of people like me have a living, and the folks over here go on boards and so forth, is to get you access, get you the audience, because one of the conversations that Andy and I had in the green room over there was the idea that so often we don't understand what our requirements are in the DoD, right? When I say we, it's because a long time ago I was in the DoD, but we just don't understand what our requirements are. We don't understand what's capable, and there is a significant amount of advocacy that's required. And so it does take some hustle and making things work, just like getting business in the real world. So, so Dave, I'm going to go to you in a second because I want to go to Kirsten next. In terms, there's a lot of questions coming up here that seem to be irrelevant to you to package into one. But you have some practical experience here, right, of getting technologies, developing interest in the DoD, and dealing with some of these issues with clearances. And dealing with issues with ITAR restrictions and so forth. Can you just riff on that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. This question is spot on. You asked about what are some of the challenges that a company might face when, transitioning or transferring technology from commercial to dual use. One of those challenges is really understanding what it takes to do that transfer and what the DoD requires. So, a big one, and to address this question about ITAR compliance, is understanding export controls, especially if you're building, hardware technology, an innovative, new, high-performance technology. Where can I ship this to? Understanding, how to define your product such that, maybe if you don't want to deal with all the complexities of ITAR, which we specifically designed our technology to be non-ITAR so that we could have kind of the freedom to innovate and to ship and have that commercial business without all the complexities. For the case of a gyroscope, just for an example, an ITAR restriction would be if you're building a gyroscope and the rate range is less than 500 degrees per second, and the bias and stability, the drift of the sensor is less than half a degree per hour, then it's ITAR, and that subjects you to all these export controls. So early on, our founders were wise enough to understand that and specifically define our technology to be above that ITAR limit so that we can, make it good enough to actually have a real use in the DoD use cases, but be able to kind of operate a commercial business freely. Naturally, one of the things that the DoD customers see is, okay, you have this great technology, can we make it better? And that's something we hear all the time. And the answer is yes, of course we can. We can make it 10x better, and we are in conversations of doing that. But that kind of enters this new level of complexity where now you have to understand all the ITAR controls and restrictions, and other things that come with that. Non-US citizens was part of this question. If you're working on an ITAR product and you have a non-US citizen that's a technologist really innovating at the company, there's certain things that they are and aren't allowed to know about what they're building, and that can complicate matters. So it's, we made a strategic decision early on to not deal with ITAR with our first main product, but as we've had success with this first product, we're getting all sorts of demands and questions about how far can we push this technology in either direction. And so, we're evaluating that as it comes. But yeah, there's definitely challenges that come with it.
So there's a great question there about ITAR. I've been using the word ITAR for 40 years, right? So I forget what it stands for. International Trade and
Traffic Arms Regulation.
International. Okay,
Yeah.
Say it again.
Arms restrictions. So it's basically you cannot transfer technology to another country without the approval of the Department of State and the DoD. So if it's a technology that the U.S. wants to maintain, there's certain wickets you have to go through to share that with partners, and different nations have different levels of partnering. As an example. So
there's some great questions coming up here. I just want to make sure I hit on some of the things that we teed up here in advance. So I'm going to go down to you, David. There was you posted this great question about speaking about where DoD engagement has directly driven technology maturity in the eVTOL and AAM sector, right? So how these advancements not only benefited military applications, but also accelerated readiness for commercial markets. So how did that partnership enhance the industry?
Sure, appreciate it, Ingar. I do want to throw a quick thank you to Mike and Saracena and Josh and teams for the invitation. And yesterday's conversations were really enlightening in terms of learning about your perspectives on economic and workforce development here in the region. So getting to the question, Merrick said yesterday that a lot of the communities and state, local level legislators are just waking up to the space. And I think that's really accurate in a lot of ways. And another one of the panelists, I think during Merrick's same discussion, said you're waking up and you're realizing that you're on third base already, or that the industry in this space is on third base already. And now there's some sense of catching up. So where the DoD and the civil industry collaboration has been really important is really kind of in that technology validation and proving ground and providing the sandbox for the FAA and the broader community at large to really understand, one, where we're at, and we might not use technological readiness in the same sense that General Croft and Andy explained, but okay, just really, is this ripe? Is it getting to a point where we need to start making practical decisions for implementation into your communities and look at how to integrate these technologies? So a couple good examples of that. And Dr. Grimsley, am I doing okay on my 15-degree lean here? and any guidance on like arm placement for like, yeah, okay, all right. And I do know there's an acronym monitor in the audience. So GAMA is General Aviation Manufacturers Association, and we represent over 150 of the world's leading aircraft manufacturers, to include your eVTOL makers in the room here today. But lithium battery is one. So we know that there's some range restrictions, but what we've been able to learn, especially via the Air Force and the AFWERX program, is what the demand on these batteries is in the takeoff and landing phases of the mission. And that's been able to inform some of the discussions at the national level with the FAA related to energy reserves. So there are rules around how, right now traditionally with airplanes and helicopters, you have to carry a certain amount of gas in addition to your mission requirement to be legal in the civil space to complete your flight. And that doesn't translate one for one when you go to lithium batteries. So again, the Defense Partnership has really helped shed some light on what the performance characteristics of these batteries are and what the rules may look like as we modernize and adapt to these new airframes like the Whisks, the Jobies, and the Archers of the world, and Beta. And the other piece I'd want to touch on, and you'll hear more about this, I think, in the last panel of the day with David and Robert from Reliable Robotics, is automation. So yesterday it was mentioned, we're getting into this area of unified flight controls, and the Air Force has been a phenomenal proving ground for how this works in practicality. So if you're at the control wheel of an airplane, you turn left, you turn right, your ailerons go up or down, you still have your gas and your power over here, and there are separate inputs for all these different functions. But with unified flight controls, and what we're learning from the defense training programs is each, an input on your inceptor, your joystick, your control, actually manipulates, many of these different functions in concert. So it's simplifying flying, and we are learning how to modernize our training programs, our certification requirements for pilots, and that's been a big piece in enabling some initial rulemaking and outlining how we're going to get these aircraft to market first on the civil side. So that just kind of underscores the importance of the collaboration between the DoD and the civil aviation space.
Right. We have, by the way, some great questions come up here. Thank you for them. So we want to make sure we hit on some of the things we wanted to get across, but we're going to, and hopefully with some of the answers we get, hit on some of these things, but these are great questions. So Andy, let's talk about this crowd specifically here. So what roles in the DoD and or Air Force do you see for electric and multi-domain air vehicles? What missions could they fulfill, and what are some new mission areas for the technology?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. When I was in northern Turkey, just off over the border with Iraq, we had a rescue wing there that has helicopters like at Moffett Field and C-130 aircraft that refuel them, and their job was to go get a downed pilot if they jumped out in enemy territory. And in the back of the C-130 is this giant crate with a parachute on it, and inside of it is an ATV that's packed in tons of cardboard, compressible cardboard. And the idea is you chuck it out the back, and either with a rescue guy who's flying next to it, and they parachute in to find the pilot, but they hop on this vehicle and drive away. I'm like, where are you guys going to drive? And I'm like, why can we not have, I could put an eVTOL in the same box, chuck it out the back, or fly it out the back autonomously, and go to that down pilot and have the person hop in, and you only have to go 20 or 30 miles to get out of really the bad area, and then a helicopter going to find you. Have we ever set that requirement? No, not that I've ever known. But here's a challenge. If you're a company that can actually do this, how do you get from, I have this idea and this product, to get the DoD to adopt it? And this is the questions here is that the key is that bridge. All right, how do I bridge from where I'm sitting to into the DoD? And that's, again, back to the point that I was trying to make earlier, which is trying to find folks that have been involved in this process or in the past that have worked with the small business initiatives. There's folks out there that can do this. And unfortunately, this is why there's a sea of consultants out there, because this is the hard part, is making those connections. And those people that are in those business areas can help you make those connections to the right entity. An example is Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC. These are your super high-end operators. There's probably SEALs and Delta involved. But they have their own requirements, acquisition, and money in the same person. So they go, that's a great idea. I want to buy some of that thing, and I'm only going to buy it for a year or 2 or 3, and then I'm going to probably not use it anymore. But that's how they do small business initiatives, and that's where a lot of these autonomous drone and different types of aerial vehicles are coming from, because it's not like the DoD. They are an entity unto themselves. That's the kind of people you got to get to, and they're willing to take very high risk for things that sometimes won't work, and that's okay. But trying to make those connections, that's the bridge to the Windsor Castle that I'm trying to, that's how you lower the drawbridge. That's the hard part. That is really the hard part, because there's a lot of great ideas out there. There's a lot of weak customers. It's trying to connect them.
So I have this conversation all the time. Every 2 or 3 weeks, someone else is introducing me to somebody who's got some new technology, and they're trying to figure out, all right, how do I think this is going to be really interesting in the Navy. I think it's going to be really interesting in the Air Force. See, I say it correctly, right? And so, and my advice to them oftentimes is exactly what Andy just said, right? The idea is that you do have to find the connectors. I mean, again, that's how I make my living. And I wouldn't say, unfortunately, they're always consultants. Fortunately, they're always consultants. But one of the big things is going to conferences like this. So often, all I do, for example, in 2 weeks is the Sea Air Space Conference in DC. I already have like 3 or 4 people coming over who I'm just helping and just going to introduce to a couple of folks at ONR, Office of Naval Research, some of the large prime contractors and so forth, just to get that they can have some conversations to think about how does my technology potentially apply in this space. And one of the things that I learned, and Tony and I were talking about this a couple of nights ago, was when I got to the point where I look at something and I say, well, can I break it apart? So, when we're at Joby, for example, said, hey, can I take those motors and can I sell those motors separately, for example, right? The whole idea is, how can I take pieces of maybe my signal processing algorithm or whatever, and I can apply it in a domain that I hadn't thought about before. How do you do that? You have conversations, and going to shows and conferences is a great way to do that, and just having those conversations. So, and I want to go to Tony just on how you think that the venture capital community is interested in this. So how does collaborating with them support this, and what kind of interest do they have?
Right. So defense tech, second to Gen AI, is the new shiny penny. Right. So everyone's interested in defense tech because why? Maybe something might happen where we're going to need a lot of defense tech, some wars and rumors of wars. So it's a very interesting space for us guys that have retired recently and to jump back in as advisors and consultants to say, listen, we know the VC community is very interested. We know you have former guys like us on your staff, for instance, at Andreessen. There's a guy like General Croft or I that works in there, and he tries to manage the portfolio of defense tech companies that they may or already have placed their bets on. So the question is, why did they get interested with that specific defense company or defense company that learned they were a dual use company, and so now they're in the space? And a lot of times it's because of what we were talking about earlier. Like Dr. Van Neveld even mentioned, is they have already done some research in the DoD community. They've gotten a SBIR, the acronym, which is the phase 1, maybe $200,000 to $300,000 for their TRL 2, 3, 4, 5 product or service, and then the VC is comfortable that the DoD is vetting that specific technology or service, and so now they're interested in you as a small business. And you think you're on your way. I have to say that as a company when that happens, because now the VC's interested. And I saw some of these questions a minute ago about your IP, when that starts to happen. Really fun stuff. You've got an interested VC. You have a phase 1 or a phase 2 with the DoD now. You have some grant money. Everything's looking good. And then we have this thing we call the valley of death occurs, where you've got that phase 2, you've got a little money, you're developing your product out of the lower TRLs, and whoops, where's the funding come from now for us to keep going? I just hired 12 guys to get my product off the ground. That's where the VC community comes in and can really help if they feel like they've vetted your technology, and usually they have because the DoD is interested. So, and I talk to these startups that I work with all the time. Do not sell, do not give up your IP at any time to any VC in this case, unless there's some extenuating circumstance, because it's not over yet. It's just going to take a little time for the DoD maybe to get you to a phase 3 or to get you to a higher level TRL where we have a prototype and we found an interested COCOM or SysCom that wants your product or service. It just takes a little while. And Joe Kopp mentioned SOCOM, you know, where I come from as a JSOC guy. We spent money on products and services quicker than any other entity in the DoD. Why is that? Why can't AFWERX do it as fast as Naval X? But the SOCOM guys in Tampa are already buying autonomous vehicles. How are they doing that fast? It's different colors of money inside the DoD. I could pull money out of maybe a maintenance line and invest in some innovative technology where AFWERX or Army Futures Command would have to go through 7 or 8 levels of SBIR approval ever to get that project funded as a phase 1. So it's very different. We try to explain this as much as we can to the VC community sometimes. They don't understand that because that's not the way it works in the commercial sector. They can move a lot faster, but that's kind of how it is in our community right now.
So SOCOM is Special Operations Command, just for your tracking. And that is a conglomeration of special operations from all the services put into one organization, and they use smaller mission sets. Right. They're more agile, they're more action-oriented. They're the ones that hunt down terrorists and that kind of stuff.
And the thing about it, though, is that everyone in the DoD space who gets after this kind of business also knows that SOCOM is the place to go. So there's a lot of people calling on them. I'm just saying that's like, don't just go running down to SOCOM here to try to get business. You need to talk to as many people as you can. You need to figure out, you need to open the aperture to find what the opportunities are, right? So not taking away from that, but the point is that there's a lot of people pursuing that business too. So don't just go over there, look at all the opportunities that are available. So along those lines, Alan, maybe you could talk a little bit more about what are some opportunities from your perspective at NPS? I mean, what are some applications for dual use? What are some vectors to pursue the business? Working with NPS, for example?
Yeah, well, for example, I mean, the question there in terms of, somebody asked about, they've set up an innovation center or incubator, what will be first steps? Or, so the DoD, all of their laboratories have an authority called Cooperative Research and Development Agreements, which is it's a formal agreement, but typically it's could be with a university, could be with a small company, could be with a prime, to explore new technology ideas. And so NPS, all of the Navy labs, Air Force, AFRLs, they all do these creatives. And it's a great way to explore, the technology development, but it also fosters those connections because if you're working with somebody at, say, AFRL, Eglin in Florida, or China Lake, where I used to be, you get those connections of, hey, how might this apply to that Navy or Air Force program? That's a first thing to do, to just explore some of these ideas. Another thing for NPS, I mentioned it briefly earlier, we have a program called JIFIX, Joint Interagency Field Experimentation. It occurs down at Camp Roberts down in Paso Robles, so still here in the Central Coast community, where we invite on a quarterly basis any number of companies. There might be some JIFIX participants in the audience, where you can come down and experiment with your technology with stakeholders from across the DoD. SOCOM's often there. We have people from Office of Secretary of Defense, from the Navy, who are just there to scope out the different technologies and see it being applied in an environment that is more risk tolerant, because we've had UAVs crash, we've had things catch on fire. It's an environment where it's okay to fail because it really is about experimentation, as opposed to going to a large-scale DoD test event where, hey, if your thing doesn't fly, suddenly all those connections just disappear. But JIFIX is another great opportunity through NPS to get technology developers, small companies to explore, show what they're working on, and build those types of connections.
So thank you. There's a question down at the bottom, and I'm curious if anyone here wants to answer that. Maybe Kirsten, Kirsten, maybe you can address it, or maybe some other folks. The DoD imposed export control and security restrictions on a SBIR recipient, and they've been staying away for that reason because of concerns about that. So from my perspective, it's been a long time since I played in the SBIR space. I seem to recall that there was some negotiability there, depending upon what you're working on, but maybe some of you could talk about it. Maybe Kirsten can hit on that?
Yeah, so, there's, like you said, I think there's negotiability. I think the key for us has been building that core technology that can apply to commercial and defense, and then when you have an SBIR, SBIR, where there's a specific need that you're trying to address, that technology is being built and adapted into something that might be for a specific use case. There's oftentimes, if you progress into phase 2 or some of the more advanced programs, there will be a long list of very specific requirements that you have to meet. And oftentimes by doing that, that kind of transitions that technology, at least that version of it, a little bit away from what you would actually sell commercially. So I think from our perspective, we've built that core technology, and there's kind of these pathways to applying that to these different areas. So we definitely, staff differently to pursue some of these SBIRs and late phase programs so that we can really, meet the schedules, meet all the requirements, go through the monthly meetings, and make sure we're building to spec exactly what they want. And, in the meantime, we're kind of continuing bringing back pieces of that, like the innovations that we make to get there, but bringing, little tidbits back into the commercial market. But there is, from our experience at least, has tended to be some separation in terms of what we're building and how we're adapting that core technology to meet the needs and demands signals that we're receiving from the defense space.
Anyone else has some observations on that one?
Well, one thing we should say, and I'll give an example. So at Futures Command, lots of firms coming in that think they may have something the Army's interested in. So what we realized kind of early on a few years ago is the first question we need to ask is, tell us a little bit about your cap table, your capitalization table. Where did you get money, if it's from angel investors, or have you had a round? And where's your company headquartered, and is it majority U.S. owned? If you can't say yes to all those, we can't move forward with any type of DoD grant. So very, very important to get started that way. And an example of a success story may be helpful here for you guys that did create is creating a pretty substantial workforce. So the trickle-down opportunity is already happening with the company we shepherded through Army Futures Command. Young guy came to see us. He's in San Antonio, decided that he would drop out of MIT to pursue his interest in hydrogen technology products. So he came to us with a new hydrogen gun. And we said, cool, we've been looking at this for 40 years, still very concerned with explosivity. So we like where you're going, not sure about you dropping out of MIT, but okay, let us know what your thoughts are. He says, well, I have a professor from Lincoln Labs, and we want to work on some other products for DoD. I said, great, actually we're talking a lot about that. Get together smart, innovative minds that are usually in graduate school or just about to finish, and we're going to throw some problems at you, and let's see what type of products and services you come up with. So here's what we need. And I just talked to General Rainey earlier in the day. It's a couple of years ago. He's like, hey, we need something in Ukraine, long range, fast, for about 1/10 of the price point of a HIMARS or a TACMS. And I said, great. I got a little guy with his professor, and I'm going to put him to work on it. And I just forgot about that. Didn't even follow up with those guys, didn't talk to them. They kept trying to come see us at the Army Applications Lab several times. And I just said, I just don't have time to talk to you right now. We got a lot of technologies we're looking at. They're like, no, we have something that we think we'll get at General Rainey's, problem set. We'd really like to talk to you about it. And I said, well, we got a lot of other stuff going. So didn't really give them any more time after that initial talk, after I'd made sure that, you know, they were an American company, it was going to be located in the US, they were working on a problem set. One day, one of my analysts comes in and he says, hey, you remember that company, Mach Industries? And I said, was that their name? He said, yeah, the ones that you guys told to go build that inexpensive cruise missile drone thing. And I said, yeah, what are you talking about? And he said, well, you know, Sequoia just through a GP and an LP round gave them $85 million to work on that problem set. I said, oh, well, that's good. So let's have them back in here. So we got them back in and we talked to them. We said, here's General Rainey. What we've decided is we're going to get you some research money called RTD&E money to get you started on that phase one. And we'd like to see a demoed product in about, what do you guys need, 12 to 18 months. We at least want to see some vertical lift and make sure that you're on the right track. They were successful. They've done that. Now let's fast forward to today. It's like 2.5, almost 3 years later since Ethan first came in to see me. And he probably has 150 employees. He's taken over some old Boeing facilities in Huntington Beach. He's not only developing that product, but he's got several other SIBRs inside DIU and in the innovation community. So, and that example is just one of many who are very similar.
So, David, look at that top question there. I was wondering if you could address that one. Do you see AAM market potential and profitability driven first by defense or commercial? And should AAM value message emphasize more defense versus air taxis? I'm just curious, from just your organization, what are some of your musings or observations there?
That's a good question. And I do want to pause real quick on the Air Force comment. So, as an Air Force veteran myself, General Croft, I got your back. And despite Ingar having played offensive line at the Naval Academy, I don't even know if you brag about playing Navy football at this point. But I'm sure we can figure something out.
Where'd you play football?
All right, so AAM market potential and profitability driven first by defense application. I just think that there's a general synergy there. That's, you know, a tough question to like give a definitive answer to. I think that the defense piece has been a springboard to, again, really help be that proving ground, which will help to provide the confidence you need in making your integration decisions in your communities to at least open the door for the potential for commercial operations, et cetera. So I do. It's just a collaboration and partnership at this point. I don't think one is going to necessarily be more impactful than the other. I think that the OEMs are certainly eyeing the commercial operations more in the long term, but the defense applications are really what's kind of getting us to that starting line.
So one of the questions was on earlier, and I think we could spend a little more time talking about that, is that how do you get after this business? I mean, this is what we're talking about most of the time here today, right? You know, so we talked about getting out after SBIRs. One of the things about SBIRs is that's not the only way to get after a defense business by any stretch of the imagination. I have never filled out an SBIR proposal, ever. I've reviewed them, but I've never done it. You know, most of the time, all the business that I got when I was at Raytheon or at 3M or for working with some of the companies I did as a consultant was just by having a conversation. Because it's not always going to be just the government you're going to go after for this work. Sometimes it's going to be a prime contractor. In fact, in my case, it's always a prime contractor. I just found it's easier to work with them, easier to find partnership opportunities, so forth, and then you develop a business case to determine whether or not it makes sense for you to actually go after the government work. So there's all kinds of different ways to skin the cat. So the question is then, you know, so what are the steps to getting after that government business, or I like to say the government-related business? Because again, you look at my pipeline, it is all prime contractors, and if the work is going to be in a lot of the stuff that I do now, focused on shipbuilding and ship repair, you know, even in that case, I'm still working on syndicating some kind of group of people to go after the government to get that kind of work, to create that requirement, make it happen. It's all about trying to get this critical mass of interest in the marketplace so that we can drive the government to making some decisions about implementing technologies and maybe changing some of the requirements so they can adopt it in the case of shipbuilding, so we can build ships faster, right? So what are some of the musings we have here in the panel about what are some practical next steps, for example, someone can take about pursuing government business? So Andy, why don't I start with you there in the middle?
Yeah, I'm just looking at that top question again, just as from a larger picture perspective here. And if you look at it from the DoD market and the commercial market, it's really sort of two different things that they focus on. So if I look at it from the DoD perspective, in this technology, it's got to be reliable, it's got to be simple, it's got to be applicable, and frankly, in many cases, it's going to be small scale, so smaller numbers, higher price. And I won't say the price doesn't matter, but in some cases the price doesn't matter. I want the capability. And that's where maybe the DoD first part of it helps you, because you can, everything when you first start, like the Saturn car company, if you started the whole Saturn car company and said you're going to make 500 cars, well, they're going to be $20 million a piece. That'll be high price, but you've proven the technology and you've gotten to those points. And then you go to the commercial, which is all about scalability and price, which the DoD is not. And so it's two different objectives. Small scale, very reliable, solves a problem. Large scale, purely based on cost and profit. And so that's where you sort of go in and out. And the question is the applicability. You got to prove that to obviously both sectors. But that's where the DoD and the commercial markets differ, but it's how it helps a company maybe go from the first part to the second part. Just a thought. I'm thinking about, in this case, from the general aviation areas, electric-powered airplanes. So your Cessna 152 is now replaced by an electric airplane. Suddenly, I have no gasoline, I have no oil, I have no hydraulics, I have a super reliable engine with a battery in it. I mean, how hard can this be? I mean, it's two things, a battery and a motor, and it's very reliable. But the problem is range, and then we can get that, we develop that, and then the range increases to the point where it's totally practical in the commercial market, just as an example.
Anyone else? Some musings about that.
Yeah, actually, so, interestingly, we've noticed that kind of a shift in how military operations are working towards these mass scale attritable systems. So actually, we've kind of noticed, at least in our market, that these autonomous systems are getting smaller and larger quantity. And so, for a company like us, where we're supplying to these autonomous systems, it's a great thing that they're getting smaller. The attritable systems specifically actually kind of align a little bit more with the commercial market too, where you'll actually have they want attritable systems, whether it be a drone or an underwater vessel. They want it to be less than, say, $100,000. So they kind of have a strict price point, and that limits the costs they can spend on each sensor and every aspect of that system. And so we've actually noticed kind of a merging back of those two markets, where suddenly you have to mass produce these things and they're deployed at scale, in war zones. So, I think that's one thing. And then, going back to the DoD and like how kind of the valley of death that I think Tony mentioned, we've actually noticed as well that the DoD, our customers are, which was surprising to me, that they are very fond of this idea of dual use. They really want to see their, suppliers have a successful and thriving commercial business, because maybe there will be a year or 2 years or whatever it may be without, a new program that you win or, new big order. But if you have that thriving commercial business, then that, gives them peace of mind that this supplier will actually stay in business and be able to be successful through any of the waves of the defense market as it naturally cycles. So, just some interesting thoughts on that as well.
So we just got a few minutes left, so I'd like to everybody go through and just give you 30-second final thoughts about it. One thing I'll share really quick is, what we're talking about also in the green room, is a lot of times putting in a proposal, there was a question about the risk associated with SBIRs. I always considered this entire process of engaging with the government, so putting in a proposal, or if it's unsolicited proposal, whatever, is just a marketing exercise. I mean, there's someone who's reading your proposal, and now he or she is aware who you are, right? And if you get funded, well, yeehaw. Now you have someone in the government who has skin in the game in terms of the success of your enterprise. So that's the way I always looked at it. It's just a marketing exercise. So don't think so much about can I win or lose this. Think about I'm marketing to somebody who's going to be reading my proposal and they're going to learn about my business and what I can do. So 30 seconds down the road, just your final thoughts for the group, please.
Yeah, so there's a lot of questions about, how can I, if I'm a new company, enter this market, like, showcase your technology, build something people need. Manufacture in the U.S. is a big one we didn't really touch on, but that's a kind of a non-starter for entering the DoD space. So manufacture in the U.S., it is more expensive, train people, automate, partner with civilian side organizations like DART, who it sounded like Joby had success with. So those are kind of some of the key thoughts. But yeah, dual use is extremely exciting, and there's even ever more push towards that sector.
Alan?
Really, I'd probably just hit on three things from a Navy NPS perspective. Yeah, I've mentioned JIFX a couple of times, JIFX. It's a great opportunity for small companies to do experimentation. Second thing is, for the Navy and DoD, for small businesses that are looking to expand their technology portfolio or leverage DoD investment, TechLink is a great resource. It catalogs all the IP that's available for licensing. And now I've forgotten my third point. But it really, I also, dual use for me is both spin in and spin out. And but being a career Navy scientist, I want to see my stuff go out, but I have to leverage industry partners to make that happen.
Andy?
I'd say crisis drives innovation. If you look at the Ukraine right now, it's driving us towards autonomy, low cost, disposable. Pay attention to those things because it's going to drive the market for the DoD and maybe in some cases the commercial sector. So either a crisis is caused by an actual crisis in Ukraine or a disruptive leader, one of the two. I'd argue we have both right now.
Tony?
All right, thank you. Yeah, thanks again to Josh, and Chris, and Mike, Saracena for having us up here today. To get the word out is what we do quite a bit now. So having been in both kind of commercial sector, been a business owner, have done DoD work on that side, and now being on this side, I know what it looks like sometimes when you think about working in the government, especially now, and some of the things we have going on in this administration, which appears to be very bullish on innovation. So this is a good thing. So we want to talk about that point first. So hang in there. Understand, like I said earlier, if you start and you have a technology, or you may know of a technology, you're interested in some problem solving, you may be talking to AFWorks one day, Naval X another day, Futures Command in the Army another day, and then you may go to DIU, and you may get a different answer with every single innovation ecosystem entity, in the sense that they may say, yeah, that's interesting, but we don't really have a requirement right now. Stay at it. One of those other services probably does, and just keep talking to them, and if you've got something, they will find that. And in fact, the final example is, you may get a SBIR award letter, but not funded. You can take that letter and go see one of the other entities and say, hey, one of the other services thinks we have something, they just don't have the budget for it. Are you guys interested? And then you've got some traction. So I always just tell people, just stay involved. It is a long sales cycle, but we have seen it be very profitable for those who do.
All right, David, last
Yeah,
thoughts?
just tying the defense collaboration back to our work in civil aviation, and then what does that mean for you in the broader, community and aviation landscape. So as of 6 months ago, thanks to a lot of the work we've done here at these different organizations, we now have a clear pathway to pilot certification for powered lift. So we now have a viable pathway to fly these aircraft. We now have the appropriate set of operating rules, which will be in place for the next 10 years for these aircraft in civil aviation. And within the next 12 to 18 months, we should have our final guidance on vertiport and infrastructure development from the FAA. And that's all kind of fruits born from the labor that we've done here throughout the last many years.
Thank you, everybody, for your time. We're going to be around, so if you got any questions, you can see us afterwards.